Hey everybody, Norm from Tested here, and on this week's episode of Projections, I want to talk about a piece of hardware, an accessory that wasn't specifically made for VR gaming and VR systems, but has added a tremendous amount of enjoyment to my own personal VR experience, and that is a tactile transducer, a bass shaker. Now, the one I've been using is called the ButtKicker. It's been out for almost 10 years now. This is the ButtKicker Gamer 2, and it's made by a company, a US-based company called Amplifier. They make a lot of specialized audio equipment for concerts. They work with theater chains and also for home theater setups. And this one specifically is a variant of their ButtKicker line of bass shakers that they've made for people who want to upgrade their home theaters, and has been very popular with the sim racing community. But not a lot of people in the VR community have been talking about this, or at least not enough in my opinion, after having using this for a month or so. So if you haven't heard of a tactile transducer or bass shaker, the idea isn't all that complicated. In the spectrum, the range of sounds that we can hear, the frequencies on the low end, that's typically served by your subwoofer. So on your home theater setup, if you have a 5.1 or 7.1 setup, you have a dedicated subwoofer somewhere in your room. Or on your home gaming system, you might have a pair of gaming headphones with 5.1 built into the headphones, which can be effective to varying degrees, let's say. And a lot of notable headphones maybe have great clarity at high volume on the high end or the mid range, but not a lot of oomph in the bass. And specifically, like the headphones that I love using, these are the Hi-Fi Man 400s. They're planar magnetic headphones. They are incredibly sounding for music, but they just don't have a lot of bass response to them, which is why something like this pairs perfectly with a bass shaker, which is all about bass, and not just the sound of the bass, but the feeling of that low end. There is a part of the spectrum where the sounds, the vibrations are things that you can feel. You go to a concert, back when we went to concerts, or you go to like a big movie theater chain like Dolby Cinema, and you would feel on the seat, you just feel that low end, the rumbling of that sound through your body. It's one of the best parts of going to a location-based movie or concert, because they have the equipment that people just don't have set up in their homes or set up in their VR systems. And so that's where I've been using this. The installation, it basically comes in two components when you talk about looking at bass shakers. There's the actual transducer itself, that's right here. It's about a 4-pound unit, and this clamps onto your office chair. So if you're using a swiveling office chair, chances are that you can pull down that cover on the swivel, and this just clasps right around it, and you tighten it up real tight, and that's the install on this part. And then the other half of the equation is the amplifier. And so the ButtKicker Gamer 2 comes with a 90-watt amp. If you're buying or building your own bass shaker setup, you'd have to buy both components separately. And this amp is pretty good. It's, again, a big piece of hardware. You're plugging into power. On the back, you are then plugging this into the bass shaker and then getting input via this RCA cable from either your game system, your home audio system, or in my case, a laptop running my VR system. And then on the front, you have these manual toggles for a high and low filter cutoff, as well as a knob for the high filter, as well as volume controls and a port to connect a remote, so you don't need to get to access to the amp whole time. You can turn on the power as well as the volume settings on that tethered remote. Now, of course, this works with traditional PC games and console games, and the setup is a little bit different for each. For example, if you're using USB headphones, you can't siphon off and piggyback off of that USB signal easily onto this, an analog signal. That's what it wants. So you have to use something like software like Voicemeeter, that's MEETER, that then doubles your audio and lets you send audio to both your USB headphone as well as a 3.5mm jack, like your laptop or audio out, or if you have a sound card, a 5.1 sound card, that 0.1, the sub channel, that's what you want to pipe into here. And for my setup, if I'm using like an Oculus Rift S, it's really easy in the Oculus software to just say double up, send audio not only through the USB for the built-in audio, but also double it out for the line out as well. Same with Steam VR, very easy to set up. So you plug the power in. It is a tethered connection, right? So you're tethered not only from your computer system to the amp, and then the amp to power, but then amp also to the bass shaker, which is then attached to the chair you're sitting on. So you do have a little bit of cable management to do. And the cable from the amp to the bass shaker is about 13 feet long, and they do include a breakaway connection. So in case you roll away and don't realize you're still connected to the amp, it won't break any of the cables. It'll just break apart there, although it is a pretty stiff connection, so I wouldn't rely on that. Just be aware that you are going to be tethered with this. So I tested the ButtKicker Gamer 2 on both my swiveling office chair as well as a drum stool, and it worked well on both. And in fact, the drum stool was super easy to clamp on. It allows me a little bit more freedom of rotation as I'm swiveling in 360-degree VR games or playing with the Oculus Quest. When it's all set up, because you are getting these extra vibrations, you do have to make sure that you stabilize everything that's on your chair. So for example, my chair has a bunch of levers for adjusting the height and the tilt, and I do get a little bit of clack from that extra chatter because as the transducer is shaking, those levers are also shaking, so you have to kind of bind those or foam insulate those, and it's recommended to also put some foam pads on the bottom of your chair. But in the headset, in-game, I'm playing cockpit games, so Elite Dangerous, Lo-Fi, which I talked about last week. Air Car is a very popular game where you're on these vehicles that have this great bass low end. It's the rumble of the engines on these hover cars or of a helicopter or of the engines that you can then amp up in the game settings. And you do have to do a little bit of tuning in your game settings because it can't tell the difference between what the signal is coming out of the system, even with the filters on. So you might want to turn down some of the game music, adjust your voice settings so you're not getting vibration with everything. And there is software out there like SimVibe or SimHub, which is free to try out, that lets you tune and calibrate the low-end output so the signals that come from those sim games are supported. The rumbling when you go off-road or the gravel of the road, that's all extra information that can get passed through to this intermediate software, and then it actually lets you feel that on your chair, which is it's so amazing. It's one of these things that's so frustrating also to talk about because I can't communicate to you effectively over a YouTube video that feeling. I mean, I can show you this thing is vibrating, but you gotta believe me, it is something you feel. And in VR, a little bit of haptics goes a long way. We have haptic feedback on our Oculus touch controllers. And when you're firing a pistol in a game, you feel that little bit and you feel not a real recoil, but you definitely get that sensation that's there and you notice it when it's not there. Now, when you translate that to a bass shaker, you really, really notice it. And it's at a point where when I'm playing a seated game and the amp isn't turned on because I forgot to turn the power on, I feel like I'm missing half the experience. It's really, really augmenting. I'm going back to my old library of VR games and just trying different cockpit games, trying different racing games, because everything just feels so much better, more awesome with the space shaker attached. It's something I almost can't play games without now in VR, and it makes me want to play more seated experiences than I do standing experiences because I have that extra bit of tactile haptic feedback. Now, of course, it also works great for movies and music. So I'm listening to things like the Hamilton soundtrack, and there I'm turning off the high and low filters because I want to feel the vibration throughout, and that sounds awesome. Movies like military war movies or things like the Transformers films. I was watching the Bumblebee film recently, and every time Bumblebee runs across the forest and lands with a thud, you're feeling that thud. When you see a helicopter fly across the screen and you hear and you see the rotor spinning, you're feeling that. It's so cool. So it's one of those things that I'm frankly surprised hasn't been talked about more, or at least in my opinion, not enough in the VR community, because it's thought of as a home theater accessory or something made specifically for sim racers. And I'll be the first to tell you, I'm not a sim racing guy. You know, I've dabbled in iRacing, Project Cars 2, Dirt Rally, just to see what it's like in VR, but for all manner of cockpit games, whether it's for space sims, whether it's for arcade racing games or mech games, a transducer is almost like an essential upgrade to, because you're gonna be playing it seated anyway, and why not add that extra haptic feedback? There's still so much I want to do with this. I'm going back through a library of games, you know, and even non-VR games, just feeling like it's a whole different experience. How often do you get something completely different that you've never had in your gaming experience at the home? That's what something like a Bass Shaker has done for me. So I think it's totally worth checking out. I'm so glad I got this to install, and I will be integrating it in a future build because I do want that full cockpit experience now. Some people even have 2 of these connected to their cockpits, and I can't even imagine what that's like. I do want more after I've had this for a while. If you have been using a Bass Shaker or tactile transducer, you've built your own setup, I'd love to know what are your favorite game experiences, whether it's in VR or not in VR, your favorite soundtracks, your favorite movies to watch to make the most out of that. Please share that in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.